Hi everybody, this is Tyler giving an update on Jenny. We're going to try to do these video blogs going forward, just so that we can inform everybody who is concerned and has been praying for Jenny. So this is the first of those, and probably the blogs will get better as we go forward with this. But I'm going to try to give a quick summary of what happened today at the surgeon. We went and spoke with the surgeon today about Jenny's cancer, and I've got some notes I'll be looking at as I kind of explain what she described to us. So Jenny had a biopsy of the tumor last week. We got the information on Monday, and so then we met with the surgeon, and she had reviewed the biopsy results, and so I'll go through those. The size, they did an ultrasound, and the size was 1 centimeter across, so fairly small. They did then a microscope review of the biopsy, and it measured out at 6 millimeters at the largest diameter. And that's important here and a little bit later when I share some of the other information. So the tumor was the second smallest that they do mark. They did check the lymph nodes just by feeling her underarm, and there was no inflammation in the lymph nodes. So that was negative, at least from kind of initial investigation. No, it had not metastasized in any way. And so what we know about the cell is that, as best we understand it, we spent 2 hours with the surgeon today who was explaining from the very beginning how cells multiply, how they check themselves when they multiply, and if they're copying mistakes in the genetic code, how they correct that, how they alert to eliminate cells that have copying mistakes, and how that then gets derailed in a cancer situation. So she was describing the cells that the cancer cells that they observed in the biopsy, and typically healthy breast cells or these the ductal cells they're called, they have 5 receptors. 3 of the receptors are important in cancer treatment. They have an estrogen receptor. They have a, what was the other one? Progesterone receptor. And then, just to keep it short, a HER2 receptor. And that's of the 5 receptors. These 3 can be important in cancer treatment because they have found ways to use these receptors to disable cancer cells, and if any of these are missing, they give it a name. Like if it's got all of them present, it basically says it's kind of a very breast cell-like cancer, and they can work with these receptors to disable the cancer cells. If it's missing one of those receptors, they call it a single negative. If it's missing 2, they call it a double negative. If it's missing all 3, they call it a triple negative. Hers happen to be triple negative cells, which then essentially removes tools from the toolbox for treating and dealing with this cancer cell and disabling it or killing it. And so what that does is there are just some treatments that she's not eligible for. She also said that this particular type of cell tends to explore early on, which means very early on in the tumor formation and growth. It can move out of the tumor and move to other parts of the body. It doesn't necessarily, like other cancer cells, need to go through the lymph nodes. That's the typical path, but it can move to other parts of the body, not going through the lymph nodes. They've also observed where the 6 millimeters comes in to play is that they've observed through clinical evaluations that when these tumors are 6 millimeters and below, the likelihood of it having spread is very low. And the probability, believe it or not, when it gets to 7 millimeters or 8 millimeters or 9, exponentially goes up. And that's why the 6 millimeters is important. It's right on the cusp of that probability of spreading. So her conclusion was very low probability that it's spread anywhere else in the body. And when we talk about spreading, we talk about just individual cells or hundreds of cells moving and moving to other parts of the body, but not necessarily talking about other cancer tumors forming, just cells moving. But that's kind of the beginning of eventually having a tumor form. So I think that is about it on the cell. What we're going to see the oncologist next Wednesday. The surgeon said, well, this person that I deal with, the oncologist, is definitely the expert, but just knowing what she's dealt with through the years and dealing with him, that he's most likely going to recommend a very limited regimen of chemotherapy to address any cells that have spread, because there's no way to pinpoint or determine through any testing whether or not these cells have spread and outside of the lymph nodes, right? So that's the key, and I'll get into that in a minute. So there's likely going to be a limited regimen of chemotherapy, and we're going to be talking about that next week. That's a particularly difficult thing for Jenny right now emotionally, and that's something you guys can be praying about. And we really covet your prayers during this time. So let me just talk about the rest of treating the tumor itself and the lymph nodes. So when the surgeon goes in, they'll remove the tumor. There are various options to do that. We won't get into those. And they will also go into the underarm and remove lymph nodes that are associated with the breast. And they'll test those. If the lymph nodes have cancer has moved into them, they will then radiate the next lymph nodes in the series. We'll get into it during this video, but your body is structured such that your lymph nodes up in your chest area have different zones of your body they deal with, and they go in sequence. And so typically cancer cells will go in sequence. They'll move from the breast lymph node and they'll move to the next one, which I think is the arm lymph node. And so we talked about this particular cancer cell not necessarily following that path, but it will as well follow that path. So that's one of the things that needs to be checked and basically eliminate any of those cells that are there. And then potentially radiation. If they find that there's cancer cells in that lymph set, they'll radiate the next set up. And that's really it for the surgery as to how this works. Let's see what else. There's just to wrap up. There's something that John Piper wrote and that somebody else amended. That's called "Don't Waste Your Cancer." It's really a small segment of a larger book that he wrote, "Don't Waste Your Life," and it talks about God's sovereignty in these situations, in hardships that we face, even in cancer, and that he uses it in various ways in our lives, and that he's in complete control, and that he is working through this. And we don't fully understand what he's doing at each point in time, but we know and trust that he is bringing glory to himself, and he's making us trust him more with our lives and ultimately with our entire future, because our lives are but a breath. And although it's very difficult at this point to digest for us, that's something we struggle with. We continue to place our eyes on Him and learn to trust Him more with our lives in the days that we have ahead. And I think that's it for this blog. We'll add another one with probably the end of next week. And so you guys have a good night. Thank you again for praying. All right, good night.